Hello and welcome to a bonus day 6 for the Rebel Challenge. Well done for getting this far. You've done really well to keep committed to this, and I really hope that you've started to see that questioning and maybe rebelling, you don't have to rebel, but questioning your thoughts and your automatic behaviors and your rules and noticing the different parts of you that can be in charge at times, that and really noticing how harsh your inner critic is. I'm hoping that this has given you some insight into a different way of being, so that you kind of get out of your head and you just drop into a more authentic place. So I call it your heart space. So you're moving out of this kind of rule-based, logical headspace, and into your heart space. I mean, we do need to use our head, and our brains are amazing and we have to use it, but when we rely on everything automatically without kind of understand what's going on in our head, and then we can use our head properly and our brain and our mind, and because it's amazing, but we also need to use our body and our heart and our soul. And if we're running on automatic thoughts, and if we're letting ourselves be run by all these unconscious selves that we don't know are there, then we don't live from our heart. We don't live in a way that is aligned with what really matters to us. And that affects our happiness and our fulfillment, and it affects our children and our families and our communities and the difference we can make in the world. So, what are we going to look at today? I'm going to share some more about the selves, the primary selves that tend to exist within Western society. It's in our culture, and we learn from an early age that these parts would really help us survive, in as we grow up. So, first of all, when we're born, the first self to develop is what we call the protector controller. So this is the part of you that is like, okay, so how do I keep safe? How do I keep this little tiny baby, this toddler safe? And so they look around and they work out what rules are about, what code of conduct exists in this family, or this, in the where this child is. And it works out whether it needs to bring in a pleaser to please everyone, or whether it needs to bring in, if you're the fifth child, you might have to bring in some kind of like, really strong, loud part, so that you're heard in a family of 5. Or it might be that you do need to have a very responsible part that comes in, because maybe your mother was depressed, or maybe that your parents weren't able to look after you as much, or were busy, and so you had to take on responsibility. Or there were lots of arguments, and you decided that you had to take responsibility for making everyone happy. So there's lots of different reasons, and we learn these, and it's from a mind of a very small child. And so these parts come in with very simple rules. Okay, so let's meet some of them. So the protector controller, like I said, decides what the rules are, how to behave, and then brings in these different parts to help you live by those rules. So obviously, if you're doing this challenge, you probably have a strong perfectionist. So the perfectionist is that part of you that has really impossible standards, really high expectations, and wants everything to be perfect. Now, when I say perfect, obviously that's a judgment call, and one person's perfect is another person's, oh, that's rubbish. And that person's perfect is different to, so it's an opinion. Perfection is an opinion. So really what the perfectionist is doing is getting everything just right. So that's how I like to phrase it. It's making sure that everything goes right. So for example, my perfectionist in a video like this needs to put makeup on. it wouldn't let me come here without makeup on. And most of the time I listen to it. I know that it's my perfectionist speaking, but I think, well, actually I'd feel nicer if I had some makeup on. But my perfectionist has a narrow window of how much makeup I'm allowed to wear. So I can't wear too much makeup. I can't wear bright red lipstick, but other people can because it suits them. So it's not like red lipstick is wrong, but for me, it's just not right. So do you see what I mean? So it's not necessarily this kind of idealized version of what perfection is. There's no kind of standard. It's like we have our own very individual version of what perfection is. And so it's about getting things right, and never getting anything wrong, because that's the fear really for the perfectionist. It's all about doing the wrong thing. So if I put too much makeup on, someone will judge me for that. If I don't have enough makeup on, somebody would judge me for that. So I've got to get it just right in the middle. That's what my perfectionist tells me, and in this instance I'm like choosing to go with it. So that's the perfectionist. And some of the things that come from the perfectionist are, because we never want to get it wrong, because that part of us never wants to get it wrong, we procrastinate because it's a bit scary to start. We don't step up and do things unless we know that it's going to go right. So there's a lot of strategies that we use to avoid mistakes, to avoid judgment, and not ever feel ashamed. So that the emotion that we're trying to hide as a perfectionist is shame. Okay, so let's go on to the pleaser. So the pleaser is fairly obvious. We just want to make everyone happy. And the reason we want that to happen is we want them to like us. So we're not making them, altruistically happy. We are the ulterior motive is that we want them to like us. So it's about not being rejected. It's about feeling safe and liked. So we will say yes to anything. We're always looking after other people's needs. We put our own needs first if we've got a strong pleaser. And, we're really worried about being rejected and abandoned and, not part of a group and that kind of thing. So women, especially in our culture, are taught to be pleasers. We are, we're told that that's what we have to do, explicitly and implicitly, that's part of our role. So many women have quite a strong pleaser. Okay, and the next part is your pusher. So this is very, very strong in Western culture. So we push our children to get exam results. We push our children to succeed. So from an early age, we're told that we've got to do things to be okay, to be successful, to be loved. We get praised when we do things. We get praised when we achieve things. And so that's why many of us kind of like, we can't, if you're sat on the sofa watching a TV program, it's almost like we can't relax because we need to do something as well, and what else? Yeah, it's a constant pushing, without resting. It's without replenishing. There's got to be progress. There's got to be productivity. There's got to be an end result. There's got to be an outcome. We don't want to just do things just because it's fun, because there's no outcome. That's why many of us don't allow ourselves to maybe read a novel versus maybe a useful book, or we don't allow ourselves just to do some craft or some knitting, or actually, while knitting, there's something comes out of it, doesn't it? So that might be a bit more acceptable. But there's a lot of things that we don't allow ourselves to do because there's no tangible result. And we need something to show for our efforts. We need to show and prove that we're doing enough. Okay, and then we've got a responsible self. So this is similar to the pleaser, but it's in the sense is that we always put other people's needs before our own. We are always wanting to make everyone happy, but it's a slightly different fear that we're doing it. There's a slightly different reason why that responsible part is there, and it's to stop any bad consequences happening. So it's not about being liked, it's about making sure that nothing bad happens. So you're always, the responsible part of you is always kind of looking around and managing a situation, and oh, what will happen if that happens? Oh, I better sort that out. And oh, that person is about to have an argument with that person, let's go and sort that out. Let's go make, have we got everything in for dinner? Have we, you know, what's going to upset the apple cart? What could go wrong? And I'm going to sort it. Okay, so it takes responsibility for everything. So and that can also mean that you take on other people's responsibilities as well, and that's just crazy because it's not as if we don't have enough of our own. So that's how that part affects us. And then we have a Rulemaker that basically is like a sidekick of the protector controller, and is very much, oh, you must follow these rules, you must follow these rules, and each of the rules are corresponding to a different self. So the pleaser will have certain rules, and the perfectionist will have certain rules, and so that can often be a strong part of you, and it's quite interesting to play with that part and start questioning the rules, a bit like we've been doing this week. And then there's also the inner critic. So the inner critic is actually, a good way of thinking about it is it's a policeman or policewoman that comes in and whips you into shape if you don't follow the rules. And basically, its strategy for whipping you into shape is a bit, as we spoke about in the Rebel Challenge, it doesn't actually work because it makes you feel so bad that you don't do the things that it wants you to do anyway. But that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to make sure, trying to criticize you before other people criticize you, so that you follow the rules. And it can be really, really demoralizing. Honestly, I had depression about 7 or 8 years ago, and that was because my inner critic got out of control, just told me I was useless, I was failing, I was a terrible mother, and that I was never going to be good enough. And when you listen to that every single day, you're going to lose that faith in yourself. You're going to lose that hope that you can improve on the next day, or you just, when you don't notice that that's just a part of you and not the whole of you, you believe it, and it gets you down. But when, I'm sitting here and I've got my inner critic on my shoulder, and it's saying, oh, you could have said that better, or you could have done that, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, you're probably right, doesn't matter, at least I'm here recording a video, helping people like you understand their brains better, understand their psychology better. Okay, so that's just a little taste of some of the primary selves that you will have. Actually, I've just remembered another one. This is a big one too, especially for perfectionists, because it's quite linked. It's a what will people think part. And this is the part of us that is slightly different from a pleaser, because the pleaser just wants other people to like us, so we're not rejected. But the what will people think part is a little bit more linked to perfectionism, the perfectionist, because it's all about doing something wrong and avoiding doing something wrong and being shamed for it. It's about making sure that you're good enough, because at the bottom of what will people think and the perfectionist, those two parts, that it's a fear of not being good enough, that old chestnut. So that's quite interesting to think about as well. So it's like, just notice, do you worry what will people think? That kind of faceless group of who knows who, this kind of what will they think? And maybe that part is running your life too much as well. So there we go. There's a taster of all the primary selves. And the opposite, when you've got really strong primary selves, their opposites are disowned. So for example, let's say your lazy bones, your couch potato, is completely disowned because your pusher and your perfectionist is so strong. And it's like dangerous. It's dangerous to spend a day on the sofa unless you're really, really ill. So you are not allowed to indulge that part. But what happens is when the opposite part is squashed so hard, it uses a lot of energy to keep that part down. It uses a lot of energy to make sure that no one ever could see that you might be slightly slobbish or slightly rude or slightly selfish, you know? So that takes a huge amount of energy. And then every now and then, when you're exhausted, or when you've been pushing too hard, or when you've been perfecting too much, or where you've been worrying about what people think too much, these other parts jump out and take over, which is a way of sabotaging ourselves. You know, we call it sabotage, or we call it procrastination, or we call it laziness. But it's basically these other parts going, hang on a second, you've been pushing too hard, we're going to take control. So they might take control for a day, and you just sit on the sofa hating yourself. Whereas actually, if you sat on the sofa more regularly, with permission, you know, not necessarily for a whole day, but a whole day's fine, then they wouldn't need to jump out. You'd go, oh, wouldn't it be nice just to sit on the sofa for an hour doing nothing? And you just relax and you feel okay. Your inner critic wouldn't tell you off. It would all be balanced and it would be fine. And everything's okay. And then after your hour or 2 hours or day, you get up and you go and do the things you want to do, because these parts aren't, because the thing about the primary selves, it's all about shoulds, oughts, got to. So the energy and the motivation is fear-based. So you're pushing yourself to do all these things from fear. And then every now and then that doesn't work. It's incredibly exhausted to be motivated by fear. It works quite often, you know, most of the time it works, but it's exhausting, and it's all about safety and survival, and it's not about joy. So it's all about it's all about these arbitrary rules, and a lot of the safety that we're seeking and all the fears that we're running away from don't really exist anymore. You know, they might have existed when we were children, or they might have existed when, you know, our ancestors were being chased by lions. But to be honest, nowadays most of the fears are just not real. So that I could speak for hours, as you can probably tell, but I don't want to give you too much now. So this is just a taster, you know, just start thinking about these different parts, and we will, you know, in my Facebook group and on my website, I'm constantly talking about these kind of things. So keep in touch, join the group if you haven't already, or get in touch if you want to learn more.